My wealthy son-in-law accused me of taking a silver spoon. "Get out of my house," he shouted in front of all the guests. Laughter rippled through the room. My own daughter scoffed, "A spoon? That's low, even for you." Then, without warning, a mysterious Arab sheikh stepped forward and said just 3 quiet words that froze everyone in place. "I'm glad you're here. Stay with my story until the end, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. My name is Ada. I'm 61 years old, and I truly believed I had already faced every kind of disappointment life could offer. I was wrong." The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, handwritten on thick, cream-colored paper that probably cost more than my weekly groceries. "Mother," it said in Emery's flawless handwriting, "Eli and I would be delighted if you joined us for dinner this Saturday at 7 or sharp. Please dress appropriately." That last line stung, but I told myself not to dwell on it. My daughter hadn't invited me to their Beacon Hill mansion in over 8 months. Not since Easter, when I used the wrong fork for the salad, and Eli made such a production out of it that I left early, blaming a headache that wasn't entirely imaginary. Still, this invitation felt different. Maybe Emery wanted to mend the distance that had grown between us since she married Eli 3 years ago. Maybe she missed her mother. On Thursday afternoon, I wandered through Goodwill, carefully scanning the racks for something that might fit into Eli's world. My fingers paused on a navy blue dress with tiny pearl buttons. It was my size. There was a small stain near the hem, but I could hide it with my old black cardigan. $12.50. It would have to be enough. Saturday evening came with an October chill that seemed to settle deep in my bones. I stood outside their mansion, checking my reflection one last time in the polished brass doorplate. The house towered above me, 3 stories of red brick and spotless white trim, its windows glowing warmly against the dark. Inside, elegant figures moved about. The guests had already arrived. I rang the bell, smoothing my cardigan and trying to calm the tight knot in my stomach. The door opened to James, the butler, whose face remained politely unreadable as he took my worn coat. "Mrs. Patterson," he said with a small nod, "they're expecting you in the dining room." The hallway stretched ahead in marble and crystal, chandeliers scattering soft rainbows across the walls. My footsteps echoed despite my effort to be quiet. I held my purse a little tighter as I approached the dining room. "Mother!" Emery called out. Her smile looked practiced. She moved toward me in a stunning emerald dress that likely cost more than my monthly rent. "You made it? You look nice." The pause before the last word landed harder than she realized. Eli appeared beside her, tall and confident in his tailored suit, every gray hair in place. He looked me over without hiding his judgment. "Ada," he said coolly, "how simple of you." The table was filled with familiar faces from their social circle club members, business partners, people whose names escaped me, but whose looks of quiet assessment I knew all too well. They greeted me with polite smiles that never reached their eyes. "This is my mother," Emery said, her tone suggesting obligation rather than pride. I exchanged brief greetings as the conversation drifted to investments, overseas trips, and summer home renovations. I was seated at the far end of the table next to Mrs. Whitmore, who spent most of dinner describing her poodle's grooming routine. The food was exquisite, course after course arriving with perfect timing. I followed Emery's subtle signals about which utensil to use, still haunted by the memory of Easter. By the time dessert arrived, a chocolate creation topped with gold leaf, I finally began to relax. That's when everything changed. As James started clearing the plates, Eli suddenly pushed back his chair. The scrape of wood against the floor silenced the room. His face hardened. "Stop!" he said sharply. Every head turned. Then his finger pointed straight at me. "Check her purse," he said, his voice calm and cold. "Right now." "Eli, what are you saying?" Emery asked, uncertainty slipping into her voice. "Your mother took one of our antique silver spoons," he replied. "I saw her put it in her purse when she thought no one was watching." A wave of shocked whispers filled the room. Heat rushed to my face as all eyes fixed on me. I felt small, exposed, humiliated. "That isn't true," I said softly. "I would never do that." "Open your purse," Eli insisted, stepping toward me. "Show everyone." My hands trembled as I reached for the clasp of my small black purse, the same one I'd carried every day for 5 years, while the room held its breath. I was certain there was nothing inside my purse except my wallet, my keys, and a small pack of tissues. And yet, under the weight of everyone's stares, I suddenly questioned my own memory. Then it happened. A silver spoon slipped out and landed in my lap with a soft metallic sound that felt deafening in the silence. I stared at it, stunned, my thoughts spinning. How could it be there? When did it get inside my purse? "Get out, thief!" Eli shouted, his face red with anger that looked almost triumphant. "Leave my house right now." At first, the laughter was scattered, a few quiet chuckles here and there. Then it grew, filling the room as people openly enjoyed my disgrace. Mrs. Whitmore even clapped her hands as if she were watching a performance staged just for her amusement. "Taking a spoon," someone muttered loudly. "At her age, how low can someone sink?" But nothing hurt more than my daughter's voice. "That's pathetic," Emery said coldly. "Even for you, Mom." She stood there without a trace of doubt or defense, her expression sealed in disappointment. In her eyes, I didn't see surprise. I saw confirmation, as if this moment proved every unkind thought she had carried about me for years. "Emery," I begged, forcing myself to stand despite my shaking legs. "Please, you have to believe me. I didn't do this." "Don't make this worse," she replied, turning away as though she couldn't even look at me. "Just leave." Eli stepped closer, lifting his hand as if he might physically push me out. That was when a voice cut through the chaos, calm and sharp at the same time. "That will be enough." The accent was unmistakable, refined and foreign, carrying an authority that stopped the room cold. Laughter died instantly. I turned and saw a man I hadn't noticed before. He was tall and composed, streaks of silver woven through his dark hair, his eyes deep and steady. His suit was flawless, making Eli's expensive tailoring suddenly look ordinary. More than his appearance, it was the way he carried himself that commanded attention, as if he was used to being obeyed. He walked forward, and the guests instinctively stepped aside. His gaze never left Eli's face. I watched my son-in-law's confident expression crumble into something far less certain. The stranger stopped directly in front of him, leaned in, and whispered just 3 words, so softly that no one else could hear them. The effect was immediate. Color drained from Eli's face. His hands began to shake, and he stumbled back a step, as if those words had struck him physically. He tried to speak, but nothing coherent came out. The man straightened and turned toward me. There was something in his eyes, recognition, familiarity, that made no sense at all. I was sure I had never met him, yet his gaze felt knowing, as if he understood me in a way no one else in that room ever had. Without speaking, he extended his arm toward me. The gesture was calm, respectful, protective. "Mrs. Patterson," he said gently, his tone completely different now. "May I escort you home?" I looked around the room one last time. Emery stood rigid by the window, pale and confused. Eli stared at the stranger as if he had seen something he couldn't explain. The guests whispered among themselves, sensing that something important had just happened, even if they didn't understand what. My legs felt weak, but I nodded and took the man's arm. His presence felt steady, reassuring, like shelter after a sudden storm. As we headed toward the door, Eli's voice followed us, thin and unsteady. "Sir, please, I didn't realize who she was." The stranger didn't respond. He simply guided me through the marble hallway, past the glittering chandeliers, and out into the cool October night. A sleek black car waited at the curb. Inside, the leather seats were softer than anything I had ever known, and the quiet felt like a shield after what I had just endured. The man sat beside me as the car moved through the narrow streets of Beacon Hill. I couldn't stop trembling, not from the cold, but from the shock and the lingering shame. Yet what hurt most was the memory of Emery's face, that distant disappointment, as if she had been waiting all her life for me to confirm her worst expectations. "I didn't take that spoon," I whispered, needing someone, anyone, to believe me. He turned to me, and in the glow of the passing streetlights, I saw warmth in his eyes. "I know," he said simply, as if there had never been any doubt. His certainty startled me. "How could you know?" I asked. "You don't even know me." A faint smile touched his lips. "On the contrary, Mrs. Patterson," he said quietly, "I know you far better than you might imagine." The way he said my name sent a chill across my skin. There was something unmistakable in his expression. Recognition, familiarity, and yet I was absolutely certain I had never met this man before. Someone like him would have been impossible to forget, the composed posture, the quiet authority, the way the room seemed to bend around him. "Who are you?" I asked. My voice surprised me by sounding steady even though my thoughts were racing. "My name is Rashid Al-Mansouri," he said, giving a slight respectful nod. "And you, Mrs. Patterson, are someone I have been looking for a very long time." The words sent a chill through me. Looking for me? Why? I'm nobody special. I'm just a widow living on a small pension, trying to get by. "You are far from nobody," he replied gently, "though I believe you no longer remember why." Remember? My mind scrambled for answers, but nothing fit. My life had been simple, predictable. I worked as a nurse's aide until retirement. I cared for my husband Robert until he passed 9 years ago. These days, I read library books and tend to my little herb garden. What connection could someone like Rashid possibly have to me? The car slowed to a stop in front of my apartment building, a modest 3-story brick place in Southtown that had clearly seen better days. The contrast with the mansion we'd just left made me suddenly self-conscious. I reached for the door handle, eager to retreat into the safety of my familiar routine. "Mrs. Patterson," Rashid said softly, "may I ask you something?" I nodded, still too unsettled to say much else. "Do you ever dream of sand?" he asked. "Of desert winds? Of the distant sound of helicopters overhead?" My hand froze. Those dreams had followed me for years. Fragmented flashes of endless dunes, the sharp smell of smoke, voices shouting in languages I didn't understand. I had always dismissed them as imagination, or something I'd absorbed from the news. "How did you know?" I started, but the words caught in my throat. "There is much about your past you do not remember," Rashid said quietly. "A past that connects you to my family in ways deeper than thanks or obligation. You once saved something precious to me, though I believe the memory was taken from you." "That's impossible," I said, though my heart was pounding now. "I've never been anywhere except Boston and the small town in Maine where I grew up. I've never left the country. You must be confusing me with someone else." Even as I spoke, a strange unease settled in. There were gaps in my memories, especially from my early 20s. I had always blamed time, the way details fade as you get older. But what if that wasn't the reason? "May I show you something?" Rashid asked. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an old photograph, its edges yellowed and worn. I took it with trembling fingers. The image was grainy, clearly taken in the middle of chaos. It showed a young woman in medical scrubs, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, crouched beside a hospital bed. She was holding the hand of a small boy whose head was wrapped in bandages. "That's not," I whispered, unable to finish the sentence. The woman looked exactly like me at 21. "The boy is my nephew," Rashid said softly. "His name is Omar. This photograph was taken in 1982 in a field hospital in Lebanon. The woman who saved his life was an American nurse volunteering with a medical relief organization." The year that was mostly blank in my memory. The year I claimed I'd spent finding myself after college, even though I could never explain what that really meant. The year before I met Robert. "This isn't me," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "I've never been there. I've never gone anywhere." Rashid studied me closely. "You have a scar," he said, On your left hand, near the thumb. A small, crescent-shaped mark. You probably tell people it came from a kitchen accident. My left hand was hidden beneath my cardigan, but I could feel the familiar ridge of skin. I had told that exact story for years because it sounded right, even though I couldn't truly remember how the scar happened. "How do you know that?" I whispered. "Because you got it shielding Omar when the hospital was hit," he said. "You covered him, and broken glass cut your hand. The doctor said you likely saved his life." The world seemed to tilt. This couldn't be real. You don't forget something like that, do you? "I need to go inside," I said suddenly, my head spinning. "I'm tired and this is all too much." "Of course," Rashid replied calmly, though he didn't move. "But there is one more thing you should know." I paused, my hand resting on the door handle. "The reason your son-in-law became so afraid when I spoke to him." I stopped, the image of Eli's reaction flashing back into my mind, the way the color drained from his face, the fear he couldn't hide. "What did you say to him?" I asked quietly. Rashid's expression grew more serious. "I told him who you truly are," he said. "Your name before you lost your memory and began a new life as Ada Patterson." "My real name?" The room seemed to tilt, and I grabbed the edge of the seat to steady myself. "That doesn't make sense. Ada is my name. It's always been my name." "Your name," he said carefully, "is Amamira Al-Zahra." The sound of it sent a strange ache through my chest, a pull I couldn't explain. "And you are not an ordinary woman, Mrs. Patterson. My family has searched for you across 3 continents for more than 40 years. You disappeared after saving my nephew's life. At the time, you were believed to have been lost in the explosion that destroyed the hospital." The words struck me one after another, heavy and unreal. Amamira Al-Zahra. Even hearing it felt familiar in a way that frightened me. "That's impossible," I whispered. "That's not me." But suddenly the dreams changed. They weren't distant images anymore. They came rushing back with weight and texture. A small hand clutched tightly in mine, smoke burning my lungs, voices calling out a name, Amira, maybe mine through chaos and noise. "We will talk again soon," Rashid said gently, watching my face. "For now you need rest. Sit with what I've told you, and perhaps try to remember." I stumbled out of the car and climbed the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, my thoughts tangled and racing. As I fumbled with my keys, I heard the soft sound of tires pulling away. Rashid was already gone. Inside, my apartment looked exactly as it always had. The worn sofa, the small television, the kitchen table where I ate alone. Yet everything felt altered, like a set rather than a real home. I sank onto the couch and picked up the photograph Rashid had left behind. I studied the young woman's face again and again. The longer I looked, the more familiar she felt, until it was like staring into a reflection of something buried deep inside me. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to think about the missing pieces of my life, the years I could never quite account for. What if they weren't empty at all? What if they were memories hidden so deeply that even I couldn't reach them? And what if the quiet life I believed was mine was only a story I had been telling myself for decades? I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, fragments returned. The sharp scent of antiseptic mixed with smoke. Small fingers gripping mine in fear. Voices speaking urgently in a language I didn't understand. The thunder of helicopters overhead. By morning, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at the photograph in the pale daylight. The resemblance was undeniable now. The eyes were mine, the nose, even the stubborn set of the jaw I'd inherited from my mother. But I'd never been to Lebanon. I'd never worked in a field hospital. I'd never saved a life. Had I? The knock came at exactly 9. I knew it was Rashid before I looked through the peephole. He stood in my dim hallway, immaculate in his suit, holding a leather briefcase that looked absurdly expensive against my peeling paint. "Mrs. Patterson," he said warmly, "I hope you slept well." "I didn't sleep at all," I admitted, stepping aside. "I keep thinking about that photograph. None of it makes sense." He entered my living room and glanced around without judgment, though the contrast between his world and mine was impossible to miss. He placed the briefcase on my coffee table and asked if he could sit. I nodded and lowered myself into my old armchair. "I brought more," he said, opening the case. "Photographs, records, things that may help you remember." He laid them out carefully. More images, some blurred, some clear, documents with official stamps and unfamiliar letterheads, and at the bottom, something that made my breath catch. It was a hospital identification badge, worn and yellowed with time. The photo showed the same young woman, this time smiling, her hair neatly tucked beneath a nurse's cap. Beneath the photo were printed words: A. Zara, RN Emergency Relief Corps. "A Zara," I whispered, tracing the faded letters with my finger. "That's not my name." "Your full name was Amira Louise Zara," Rashid said gently. "When you returned to America, you used your middle name. Louise slowly became Ada, a natural change, but you kept the initial, as if some part of you remembered who you were." I picked up another photograph. It showed a group of medical workers standing in front of a large tent marked with a red cross. There she was again, third from the left, her arm draped confidently around a colleague. She looked strong, capable, nothing like the fragile widow I had come to believe myself to be. "Tell me about the hospital," I whispered. "Tell me what happened." Rashid leaned forward, his face solemn. "It was August of 1982. You had been serving with the Emergency Relief Corps for 8 months, caring for civilians caught in the chaos of the Lebanese Civil War. Your focus was pediatric emergency care." As he spoke, flashes filled my mind, like scenes from a life that didn't feel like mine. Children crying in narrow beds, distant explosions, the crushing responsibility of holding someone's future in your hands. "My nephew Omar was brought in after a blast near his school," Rashid continued. "He was 7. Severe head trauma, internal injuries. The doctors believed nothing more could be done, but you refused to accept that." "I don't remember," I said, yet something stirred deep inside me. A pale child with dark eyes, a fierce determination to save him at any cost. "You worked for 14 hours without stopping," Rashid said. "You wouldn't leave his side even when others told you it was hopeless. When the shelling began again and evacuation orders were given, you stayed. When the windows shattered, you covered his body with your own." My left hand began to ache, the old scar pulsing as if awakened. I stared at the small crescent-shaped mark near my thumb, and suddenly I felt it, sharp glass, warm blood, the weight of a child beneath me as the world collapsed around us. "Oh my God," I breathed. "Omar, his name was Omar." Hope flickered in Rashid's eyes. "You remember him?" Tears streamed down my face as more fragments surfaced. "He had a toy truck, blue and red. He held it even when he was unconscious. I promised I'd keep it safe until he woke up." "He did wake up," Rashid said quietly, "because of you. But by then you were gone." The next photograph showed ruins where the hospital once stood, twisted metal, debris, people searching through the wreckage. On an official list of those missing and presumed lost was my name. Amira Louise Zara, age 21, United States citizen. "I was supposed to be gone," I whispered. "The blast threw you clear of the building," Rashid explained. "You were found 3 days later by American forces, unconscious, with severe head trauma and no identification. You were listed as Jane Doe and transported to a military hospital in Germany." I picked up another document, a medical report, severe concussion, retrograde amnesia. Patient recalls only her first name and that she is American. No family contact available. "The memory loss was real," I said softly. "I truly couldn't remember." "When you were stable enough, you were flown back to the United States," Rashid said. "You were processed as an unidentified civilian and placed into a social services program. That is how you became Ada Patterson. Ada from Louise, and Patterson from the caseworker who helped you begin again." The pieces finally aligned, forming a life I had lived but forgotten. "Robert," I said suddenly. My husband. I met him at the community center where they placed me. He volunteered there, helping people rebuild their lives. A good man, Rashid said. He gave you stability, kindness, a future. But he never knew who you truly were. I shook my head. I couldn't tell him what I didn't remember, and after a while, it felt easier to let the past stay buried. Rashid reached back into the briefcase and removed a thick folder, setting it down carefully. There is something else you must know, Amira, something that explains why finding you mattered so deeply to my family. Inside was a bank statement from an institution I didn't recognize. The account name read, Al-Zahra Memorial Fund. The balance made my vision blur. $15,200,000. What is this? I whispered. When we believed you were gone, Rashid said, my family created a fund in your honor. Every year we added to it. We could not bring ourselves to spend money that belonged to the woman who saved Omar's life. I stared at the number, struggling to comprehend it. A fortune beyond anything I had ever imagined. Omar grew up to become a doctor, Rashid continued. He is now a pediatric neurosurgeon, inspired by the nurse who saved him. He has helped hundreds of children, performing procedures once thought impossible. Every life he saved, every child who made it home to their parents, existed because of what you did in that hospital more than 40 years ago. The weight of it settled over me all at once. For decades, I had stretched a small pension, worried about heating bills and medical costs, never knowing that somewhere in the world a fortune had been waiting for me. But there is more, Rashid said, his voice growing firm. There is the matter of your son-in-law, Eli Richardson. Just hearing Eli's name tightened my chest. What about him? Rashid opened a thinner folder. 3 months ago, someone contacted our family's legal representatives here in Boston. They claimed to have information about Amira Zahra. They said they could prove she was alive for a finder's fee. My stomach dropped. Eli? The contact was anonymous, Rashid said, but the inquiry it triggered led us directly to you. Someone has known who you are for quite some time, and instead of helping you reclaim your identity, they chose to keep you in the dark for their own benefit. The betrayal cut deeper than the humiliation at that dinner ever had. Eli hadn't discovered my past by accident. He had hidden it, and somehow tried to profit from it. How long had he known? And why had he never told Emery? The 3 words I whispered to him last night, Rashid continued, were, "We know everything." I wanted him to understand that his leverage was gone, that we found you despite his efforts to control the situation. A cold realization settled in. He set me up last night, didn't he? The spoon in my purse. I believe so, Rashid said calmly. Proving it may be difficult. What matters is that you now know the truth about who you are and what belongs to you. I looked around my small apartment with new eyes, the secondhand furniture, the kitchen where I counted every dollar, the stack of bills I rearranged every month like a fragile puzzle. None of it had ever been necessary. But more powerful than the money was something else entirely. The understanding that my life had mattered. I wasn't just a woman who disappointed her daughter. I was someone who had saved lives, someone who had changed the course of other people's futures. What happens now? I asked. Rashid smiled, truly smiled, for the first time. Now, Amira Louise Zahra, you reclaim your life, all of it. The resources, the recognition, the respect that were always yours, but taken from you by circumstance and by people who should have protected you. He stood and moved toward the door, then paused. There is one more thing. Omar is 49 now. He has children of his own, and he has never forgotten the American nurse who saved him. When you are ready, he would like to see you again. After Rashid left, I sat alone, surrounded by photographs and documents spread across my table like fragments of a self I was finally reclaiming. The woman in those images wasn't weak or forgettable. She was brave. She was capable. She had simply lost her way and spent 40 years trying to find it again. 3 days later, I was sitting in the most impressive law office I had ever seen. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Boston Harbor, and the conference table alone was larger than my living room. Yet what struck me most was how I felt sitting there. Not small, not out of place, but calm, grounded, as if I belonged. Rashid sat across from me with 2 attorneys who had flown in from New York to handle my case. The documents between us told a story that grew more troubling with every page. "The timeline is very clear," said Margaret Chen, the lead attorney. "Mr. Richardson first contacted our investigative firm in March. He claimed that through genealogy research, he believed his mother-in-law might be connected to a long-missing individual associated with our clients." March. My stomach turned. That was right after Emery had casually mentioned that I seemed forgetful and might want to get my memory checked. I had brushed it off, never realizing what that comment had sparked in Eli's mind. "He specifically asked whether there was any reward money," Margaret continued. "When we explained there was none, and that we were simply grateful for legitimate information, his tone changed." Rashid leaned forward. "Tell her about the next contact." The second attorney, David Pratt, opened another folder. "In May, Mr. Richardson reached out again. This time he claimed you were experiencing cognitive decline and would require long-term care. He suggested that any assets connected to your identity should be placed in a trust, with him acting as guardian." My hands clenched in my lap. He hadn't just wanted the money. He had been laying the groundwork to take control of my life. "He had no legal standing to do that," Margaret said quickly, "but he clearly believed confirmation of your identity would create financial access through your daughter." "Show her the recordings," Rashid said quietly. David placed a small device on the table. "Mr. Richardson wasn't aware that our initial calls are recorded as part of standard security procedures." "You should hear this," David said quietly. He pressed play, and Eli's voice filled the polished conference room. Soft, controlled, unmistakably his. "Look, I'm not asking for much," the recording said. "Just a finder's fee and maybe some consideration when it comes to managing the old lady's affairs. She's not getting any younger, and honestly, she's already showing signs of confusion. My wife doesn't have the experience to handle serious assets, but I do." The way he referred to me made my hands tremble, but what followed was even worse. "She's been a burden on our family for years," Eli continued. "Always needing help, never quite fitting in socially. If there's money involved, it's better for everyone if it's handled properly. She might even be happier in a nice place where professionals can take care of her." Tears welled in my eyes, but they weren't from hurt. They were from fury. Every awkward dinner, every sideways comment about my clothes or my manners. Eli hadn't just been unkind, he had been building a story, step by step, making me look helpless and inconvenient. "There's more," David said gently. "This one is from July." Another recording began. Eli sounded impatient now. "You're moving too slowly," his voice snapped. "I need to know what we're dealing with. My mother-in-law is starting to ask questions about her past. She's talking about strange dreams. If she remembers something before this becomes official, it could complicate everything." Margaret stopped the playback. "That's when we knew this wasn't a normal inquiry," she said. "Family members don't usually worry about the subject of an investigation remembering their own life." "What did you do?" I asked, my voice shaking. "We moved faster," Rashid replied, "and we began observing your family more closely. We needed to understand who we were dealing with before approaching you." David slid another stack of papers toward me. Printed emails. Conversations between Eli and a man named Marcus Whitley, a private investigator. I read the first message, my stomach tightening. "Marcus, I need you to dig deeper into Ada Patterson's background, especially any gaps from 1982, 1983. Also, look into legal ways to have someone declared mentally incompetent in Massachusetts. Budget is $10K. This must remain confidential." The reply was no better. "Found some gaps in her medical history from the early 80s. Looks like head trauma and memory loss treated at a military hospital in Germany, then placement through a displacement assistance program. No family listed. As for mental competency, you'd need medical documentation and court approval. I can research options if you want to proceed." "He's been planning this for months," I whispered, staring at the dates. While I was worried about saying the wrong thing at dinner, he had been figuring out how to erase me. It goes further, Margaret said softly. She placed one final document in front of me, a draft legal petition. Eli had prepared paperwork to request emergency guardianship over me, claiming I was no longer capable of managing my own life. He described incidents that never happened, said I got lost, forgot to pay bills, left the stove on repeatedly, painted a picture of a woman who didn't exist. The strategy was calculated, Rashid said. Once he had control, any assets connected to your identity would be placed under his authority. When we confirmed who you were, he would already be positioned as the one making decisions for you. But why? I asked, even though the answer was forming in my mind. He isn't as secure as he appears, Margaret explained. Our review shows his businesses have been struggling for 2 years. He carries nearly $800,000 in debt and has hidden this from your daughter. Everything clicked. Eli hadn't just wanted money. He needed it. And when he uncovered hints about my past, he saw a way out that made him look like the responsible one, the devoted husband managing a difficult situation. The spoon, I said slowly. He put it in my purse to make me look unstable. Almost certainly, David confirmed. If you had reacted with confusion or panic, it would have supported his claims. He likely had other situations planned as well. I thought back over the years, the subtle humiliations, the way he made me feel small and unwelcome. It had never been simple dislike. It had been preparation. What about Emery? I asked, already fearing the answer. Does she know? Rashid's expression softened. We don't believe she does. All indications suggest she's been manipulated just as much as you. He's been very careful to filter information, guiding how she sees you instead of allowing her to trust her own experience. That realization hurt in a different way. My daughter hadn't pushed me away out of malice. Her view of me had been shaped over years, quietly and deliberately. Every moment I'd questioned myself as a mother, every time her distance had wounded me, Eli had been there in the background, steering her thoughts to serve his own interests. The question now, Margaret said calmly, is how you want to proceed. We have sufficient evidence to pursue criminal charges for financial misconduct and attempted exploitation. Civil action is also an option. I looked out over the harbor, watching boats cut through the restless water. For decades, I had avoided confrontation, accepting whatever treatment came my way, but that woman no longer existed. I was Amira Zara. I had faced chaos and survived it. I don't want revenge, I said at last, but I won't allow him to keep controlling my daughter or anyone else. Rashid nodded. What would you like instead? I turned back to them, feeling a steadiness I hadn't known in years. I want the truth to come from him. I want Emery to hear it directly, and then I want him out of our lives for good. Margaret smiled. That's possible. In fact, we have a plan that should accomplish exactly that. As they explained it, something powerful settled inside me. Control. Eli had seen only a quiet, struggling widow. He never imagined I could outthink him. When do we begin? I asked. Rashid checked the time. Tomorrow evening. Emery will be present when Eli receives some unexpected news about your inheritance. When I left the office that day, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not just because my circumstances were about to change, but because I finally understood my worth. I wasn't a burden. I never had been. Eli Richardson had spent months trying to take my life from me. Now the balance had shifted. The call came right on schedule at 6 the next evening. I listened to Eli's voice through the speakerphone, keeping my tone measured as he stepped into the role we'd anticipated. Ada, he said, forcing warmth into his voice, I'm glad you answered. I've been thinking about what happened at dinner and I owe you an apology. An apology? After everything. Have you? I asked gently, using the same calm tone I'd relied on for years. Yes, he replied quickly. Emery and I talked, and we think there may have been a misunderstanding. You know how hectic dinner parties can be. A misunderstanding. As if the situation had simply happened on its own. I followed the script Margaret had helped me prepare. "That's kind of you," I said. "I'm still puzzled about how it happened." "These things do," Eli said smoothly. "What matters is family. And speaking of that, I have some wonderful news I'd love to share with you in person. Would you join us for dinner tomorrow? Just us this time. Very relaxed." I smiled to myself. He believed he was in control. "I'd like that," I said. "What time?" 7. "And please don't mention this to anyone yet. I want it to be a surprise for Emery." Of course he did. Control had always been his priority. After the call ended, I looked at Rashid, who had listened quietly from the kitchen. "He took the bait," he said. "Greed made it easy." "The next part won't be," I replied. Friday evening would require precision. The attorneys would be waiting nearby, recording everything. At the right moment, Rashid would arrive with documents that would leave Eli no room to hide. But before any of that, I had one last thing to do. That afternoon, I drove to the boutique in Back Bay Margaret had recommended, ready to step into the next chapter of my life. The sales associate, a woman about Emery's age named Sarah, looked surprised when I walked in wearing my usual thrift store cardigan and sensible shoes. "I need a dress," I told her. "Something that says I'm not the same woman I was last week." Sarah studied me more closely. Not my clothes this time, but my posture, my expression, the way I carried myself. Something had shifted inside me, and she could see it. "What's the occasion?" she asked. "I'm reclaiming my life," I replied. An hour later, I left the boutique wearing a navy blue dress that fit perfectly, paired with a matching jacket that made me look composed and confident. The total was $450, exactly my monthly rent, but it was worth every cent just to see the respect in Sarah's eyes. I stopped by a salon afterward where they styled my hair to highlight my cheekbones, somehow making me look years younger. By the time I arrived at Emery's house that Friday evening, I looked like the woman I was becoming, not the struggling relative they were used to quietly judging. Emery opened the door and froze. For a moment, she genuinely didn't recognize me. "Mother," she said softly, "you look different." "I feel different," I replied, stepping into the marble foyer that had once made me feel small. Tonight, it was just another room. Eli came in from the living room, clearly expecting the same timid woman he'd embarrassed at his last dinner party. His smile flickered when he saw me, just for a fraction of a second, before he recovered. "Ada, you look lovely," he said, though I could hear the unspoken question behind the compliment. "Thank you," I said, following them into the dining room, where the table had been set for 3. Dinner was anything but casual. It was elaborate, carefully staged, clearly meant to impress me. The irony was almost amusing. After months of quiet contempt, Eli was now trying to charm me. "So," he began as the main course was served, "I mentioned I had some news." I nodded, cutting my salmon with deliberate calm. Beneath my dress, the small recording device Margaret had given me captured every word. "As you know, I have some connections in finance," Eli continued. "One of them recently shared something very interesting about your past." Emery looked confused. "What kind of information?" Eli smiled, the smile of a man who thought victory was close. "It appears our Ada here may be entitled to a sizable settlement from overseas, something tied to work she did years ago." "I never worked overseas," I said evenly. "I've never even left the country." "That's where it gets complicated," Eli replied, excitement creeping into his voice. "My contact believes you may have forgotten certain details. Memory issues can happen with age, but once your identity is fully established, there could be a significant amount of money involved." Emery frowned. "Mother doesn't have memory problems." But Eli barely noticed. "Sweetheart, she's been a little confused lately. Remember when she forgot about that dinner? Or seemed unsure when she visited last month?" I watched doubt flicker across my daughter's face. Eli had been planting those seeds for months, and now they were sprouting. "The point is," he continued, "this kind of money needs to be handled responsibly. A trust. Possibly a guardianship arrangement. For her protection, of course. I'd be happy to manage it." There it was, clear, recorded. Exactly what we needed. "How much money?" Emery asked quietly, torn between concern and disbelief. "Anywhere from 5 to 15 million, Eli said, unable to hide his eagerness. "Possibly more." Emery's fork slipped from her hand. 15 million? Before Eli could elaborate, the doorbell rang. James appeared, looking uncertain. "Sir, there's a gentleman asking to speak with Mrs. Patterson. He says it's urgent and involves legal documents." Eli's face drained of color. This wasn't part of his plan. "Please show him in," I said calmly. Rashid entered the room carrying a leather briefcase, composed and authoritative. He acknowledged Emery with a polite nod and ignored Eli entirely. "Mrs. Patterson," he said formally, "I apologize for the interruption, but there are documents that require your immediate attention." "What documents?" Eli snapped, panic creeping into his voice. Rashid finally looked at him, his expression cold. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I am Rashid Al-Mansouri, representing the Al-Mansouri Family Trust. We've been in contact with your legal representatives regarding Mrs. Patterson's inheritance." The silence that followed was absolute. Eli sat frozen, his carefully constructed plan unraveling in real time, while I sat calmly, finally watching the power shift exactly where it belonged. "I'm sorry," Emery said slowly, confusion clear in her voice. "What inheritance? And how do you know my mother?" Rashid opened his briefcase and removed several photographs, laying them carefully across the dining table. They were the same ones he had shown me before. "Your mother, Mrs. Richardson, is not who she appears to be," he said calmly. "Her real name is Amamira Zahra. 42 years ago, she saved the life of my nephew in a field hospital in Lebanon." I watched Emery's face as recognition dawned, her breath caught. That's you," she whispered, staring at the young woman in the pictures. Then she looked at me, confused. "But you've never been to Lebanon. You've never even left the country." "Your mother suffered severe memory loss after a bombing," Rashid explained. "She lost all knowledge of her former life and was brought back to the United States through a refugee assistance program under a new identity. My family has been searching for her ever since." Eli finally spoke, though his voice sounded strained. "How did you find her?" Rashid's smile was cold. "Someone contacted our investigators claiming to know where Amamira Zahra was. That person demanded $50,000 for the information and suggested that Mrs. Patterson would require a guardian to manage her inheritance." The color drained from Eli's face. Emery turned slowly toward him. "Eli," she said quietly. "What is he talking about?" Rashid placed another document on the table. "Perhaps your husband would like to explain how he discovered your mother's identity, why he concealed it, and why he planned to have her declared mentally unfit." "That's not," Eli began, but the words failed him. "We have recordings," Rashid said evenly. "Emails, written plans to pursue guardianship using fabricated claims. Shall I play them for your wife?" Emery stood so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You knew," she said, her voice shaking. "You knew about all of this and said nothing." "It's not what you think," Eli insisted. "I was trying to protect her. Protect both of you." "Stop," I said, my voice calm but firm. "There was nothing wrong with me. You invented those stories because you needed money and thought I wouldn't notice." I stood, feeling steadier than I ever had in my life. "You planted that spoon in my purse. You told my daughter I was losing my clarity. You hired investigators to take control of my life and my future." Emery slowly sank back into her chair, staring at Eli in disbelief. "The spoon," she whispered. "You did that?" Eli's shoulders sagged. "I needed the money," he said at last. "The business is failing. We're drowning in debt. When I learned about her past, it felt like a way out." "By taking it from her?" Emery asked, anger tightly contained. "I wasn't taking it," he said weakly. "I would have taken care of her. She never would have known." The room fell silent. The casual cruelty of his words needed no response. Rashid closed his briefcase. "Mrs. Patterson, your inheritance has been fully confirmed and transferred into accounts solely under your control. $15,200,000 plus accumulated interest." I barely reacted. I was watching Eli, seeing the last trace of confidence leave him. "You're leaving," I said quietly. "Tonight. You'll cooperate with the divorce and give Emery whatever she asks, and if you ever try to interfere with my life again, I will respond decisively." Eli opened his mouth, then stopped. One glance at Rashid told him everything he needed to know. "The recordings will remain private," Rashid added, "as long as you comply." Emery didn't look at her husband again. "Go," she said softly. "Just go." 3 months later, I stood in the garden of my new home in Cambridge, sunlight filtering through the maple trees lining the fence. I hadn't chosen anything extravagant, just a place that felt peaceful and entirely my own. Every Saturday morning for the past 6 weeks, Emery had come over for coffee. Healing took time, but we were rebuilding something honest, something stronger than before. "Mother," she said warmly as I opened the door. "Amira," I corrected gently, smiling. "It's time you used my real name." She smiled back, a little unsure but trying. And for the first time in decades, I knew exactly who I was and where I belonged. "I'm Amira. How are you settling in?" Emery asked. I led her into the kitchen, where I'd already prepared her favorite coffee Ethiopian beans that once would have felt like an impossible luxury, but now simply felt like a small pleasure. Sunlight poured through wide windows overlooking the garden, where I'd started growing herbs again. It surprised me how easily that old joy had returned once I had room for it. "I had an interesting call yesterday," I said as we sat down at the table. "From Omar." Her face brightened. Over the past few months, she'd heard countless stories about Dr. Omar al-Mansouri, the little boy whose life I'd saved, now one of the most respected pediatric neurosurgeons in Boston. She'd even met him briefly when he flew in from Chicago to see me. "What did he want?" she asked. "He invited me to speak at a medical conference next year," I said, still adjusting to the idea. "He wants me to talk about trauma nursing in conflict zones. He thinks my experience might help young doctors understand why giving up on a patient is never an option." For so many years, I'd believed I'd failed at the things that mattered: marriage, motherhood, making a difference. Learning that I had actually saved lives, that my work had mattered enough for someone to search for me for 4 decades, reshaped how I saw myself. "Will you do it?" Emery asked. "I think I will," I said. "It feels right to honor that part of my life, the part I lost for so long." We sat quietly for a while, sipping our coffee and watching cardinals flit around the feeder outside the window. It was still strange to live without constant worry about bills, but I was learning to enjoy the calm that came with security. "I have news too," Emery said at last. Something in her voice made me look up. "The divorce is final." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. The last 3 months hadn't been easy for her, not just the end of her marriage, but the realization that the man she trusted had shaped how she saw her own mother. "How do you feel?" I asked. She was quiet for a long moment. "Free," she said finally. "For the first time in years, I can think clearly. I keep remembering things, little comments Eli made about you, times he discouraged me from seeing you. I didn't see it then." "You weren't blind," I said firmly. "You trusted someone you loved. That's not a flaw." "But I should have defended you," she said, her voice breaking. "I let him convince me you were less than you are. I'm so sorry." I stood and wrapped her in a hug that felt decades overdue. For a moment, she was the little girl I remembered, before distance and doubt had crept in. "Listen to me," I said, pulling back to meet her eyes. "I spent 40 years not knowing who I truly was, believing I was a disappointment. I wasn't, and neither were you. We both did the best we could with what we knew." She wiped her eyes. "I just wish I could make it up to you." "You already are," I said softly. "Every Saturday you come here." Every call just to talk. Every time you look at me like you're proud, I feel it. Later that afternoon, after Emery left, I sat alone in my study, looking at the framed photograph on my desk. The old hospital image Rashid had first shown me now hung beside newer ones, me with Omar and his family, Emery and me at the housewarming she'd organized, even one of Rashid and me at dinner celebrating the final paperwork. The money had changed my circumstances, but it hadn't changed who I was. I had simply remembered her. I still preferred quiet evenings at home over crowded social events. I still found happiness in simple things, tending my herbs, feeding the birds, listening to the house settle at night. But now I had something I'd never truly had before: choice. And that changed everything. The phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. The caller ID showed a Boston number I didn't recognize. "Hello, Mrs. Patterson. Sorry, Miss Zara," a woman said. "This is Janet Murphy from the Refugee Assistance Center." I remembered Janet well. She was a social worker I'd met after I began volunteering there a month earlier. Helping refugees and displaced people felt like a full-circle moment, using my own experience of loss and rebuilding to guide others through theirs. "Hello, Janet. How can I help?" "We have a situation," she said carefully. "An older woman came in today. She's deeply shaken. She doesn't remember her name or where she's from, but she speaks English with an American accent. The doctors believe it may be stress-related amnesia. She's frightened and doesn't trust anyone." I closed my eyes, instantly remembering the terror of waking up in a hospital with no memory of who I was. "I'll be there," I said. An hour later, I sat across from a woman about my age in a small counseling room. Her hair was tangled, her clothes worn, and her eyes carried the emptiness of someone who had endured too much. When she looked at me, something shifted. Not recognition of me, but recognition of understanding. "Hello," I said gently. "My name is Amira. I used to forget things too." She didn't respond right away. She just watched me. Slowly, as I shared parts of my story carefully, without overwhelming her, I saw her shoulders relax. "You really forgot who you were?" she asked quietly. "For 40 years," I said. "But I built a life anyway. And when my memories returned, I didn't lose that life. I added to it." By the time I drove home, it was dark, but I felt energized instead of exhausted. Helping someone else through the fear and confusion I once lived with gave my journey a meaning no amount of money ever could. Back in my kitchen, I made a simple dinner pasta with herbs from my garden and sat down with my book. My thoughts drifted to the window, where the lights of Boston shimmered in the distance. Tomorrow was Sunday, which meant Omar would likely call just as he did every week. Rashid would probably stop by next week with updates from his family's foundation, where I'd recently agreed to advise on medical relief programs, and Emery would be back next Saturday, continuing our new tradition of coffee and honest conversation that grew easier each time. For most of my adult life, I'd felt like I was waiting for my husband to come home, waiting for my daughter to call, waiting for proof that my life mattered beyond simply getting through each day. I'd measured my worth by other people's approval and expectations. But sitting in my own kitchen, in a home shaped by my own choices, surrounded by relationships built on truth, I realized something quietly profound. I wasn't waiting anymore. This was my life. Whole. Meaningful. Mine. The woman I was at 21 saved a child's life in a war zone and lost herself in the aftermath. The woman I became at 61 found herself again and used that strength to lift others. Both women were me. Both stories mattered. For years I believed I wasn't enough, not a good enough mother, not important enough, not worthy of love or respect. But I was wrong. I had always been enough. It simply took me 61 years and a journey across the world to remember it. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, dusting the garden and the bird feeder that would draw cardinals in the morning. Inside, I was warm, safe, and finally home, not just in a house, but in my own skin, my own story, my own truth. I thought about Eli sometimes, wondered whether losing everything had taught him anything, But mostly, I didn't think about him at all. Some people deserve second chances. Others deserve to be left behind. Knowing the difference may have been the greatest gift of all. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. Silver hair, lines around my eyes, but a steady posture and an easy smile. I looked like someone who had lived, struggled, survived, and finally come home. I looked like Amira Zara. I looked like myself. Now I'm curious about you, the one who listened to my story. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever faced something similar? Share your thoughts in the comments, and on the final screen, I've left 2 more stories from the channel that viewers love you won't expect where they go next. Thank you for staying with me until the end.